About 2 years ago, I got an email from a guy named Jack Stafford, a British songwriter and podcaster who lives in Italy. I think the first time he wrote to me was to be a guest on this podcast. In the email, he wrote that he grew up in the UK but quickly moved to Amsterdam, where, as he said, he lived a toy boy lifestyle, working as a copywriter, musician, and fashion designer. However, he went on, this led to burnout, so Jack sold all his possessions and set off on a bicycle tour as a nomadic troubadour. He traveled through 45 countries, playing hundreds of house concerts in return for a place to sleep. His email went on to explain that he recorded many of his crazy adventures in his songs, and through those, plus countless self-help books and podcasts, as well as yoga, Ayurveda, and Vipassana meditation, he grew and grew to become a unique modern-day troubadour. The culmination of his life skills is the unique Pod Songs podcast, he said, where, together with other musical artists from around the world, he interviews all types of people and writes a song to bring greater awareness to their work. In the previous year alone, he said, he had released over 100 songs. I decided not to respond to Jack's email. Welcome to The Third Story. I'm Leo Sidran. As you might imagine, a guy like Jack Stafford doesn't just send one email and then leave it alone. This is a guy who traveled through 45 countries asking people if he could sing his songs in exchange for a place to sleep. He doesn't give up after just one email. Over the course of the following 9 months, he continued to reach out to me consistently, eventually inviting me to be a guest on his Pod Songs podcast. Over the course of those 9 months of relentless emails from Jack, I came to understand that he and I have some things in common. We're both songwriters and podcasters. We've both paid our dues in the world of advertising and commercial media, and we're both searchers in one way or another. He suggested that I send a short list of people who I would like to interview and then use that interview as inspiration for a song. As you probably know, I'm already in the habit of interviewing people for the Third Story podcast, and in fact, I've written a lot of songs that were either direct responses to those interviews or loosely inspired by them. So choosing who to talk to for Jack's podcast was a little confusing, and I decided to just kind of freestyle some names. And the first name I came up with was physicist and writer Alan Lightman, whose books I read in college, and they had an influence on me. I figured if Jack can line up Alan Lightman, I'll do it. A week later, Jack wrote back and asked me when I'd like to do the interview with Alan Lightman, who had already agreed to do it. And that is where we find ourselves today. What follows is a little unusual. It's my conversation with Alan Lightman for the Pod Songs podcast. So the first bit is actually a conversation between me and Jack Stafford, getting to know one another and figuring out how this is supposed to work, before Alan joined the call. The conversation between me and Jack actually goes to some pretty unexpected places before the main event gets started. And the bulk of the episode, which is my talk with Lightman, is a complete journey. I'll just say, it was unlike any other interview I've ever done, and I think you'll understand why as soon as it starts. It ended up turning into an extraordinary conversation about the intersection of science and the humanities, mortality, success, the cosmos, technology, consciousness, writing fiction, embracing ambiguity, out-of-body experiences, Ernest Becker's denial of death, and the idea that there are no answers to profound questions. We actually recorded this almost a year ago, back in November of 2022. And then I wrote a song inspired by the interview, and that song will be released later this month, on October 20th to be exact. It's called Meaning in the Moment. But I'm going to play a little snippet of the song at the end of today's episode to whet your appetite. I've edited this episode from my feed. You can watch the full unedited thing on YouTube or on the Pod Songs website if you're interested. To do that, check out podsongs.com, where you can listen to all of Jack's episodes, in which either he or some other musical guest interviews a beloved figure, and then they write a song about it. And at Pod Songs, you can also watch the video of today's conversation because we did it as a video call. And of course, you can visit the Third Story website, third-story.com, to sign up, subscribe, and check the archive. Hundreds of past episodes with scientists and creative writers, and other deep dives with brilliant creative people. And if you like this project, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or give it some stars. The Third Story is made in partnership with WBGO Studios. Visit wbgo.org/studios to find out more about all their award-winning content. And as a matter of fact, The Third Story was just recognized for excellence in podcasting by the Signal Awards, where it came in silver in the Audience Choice Award for Best Music Podcast. Now, buckle up and strap in for this somewhat unusual ride. Me and Jack Stafford, followed by me and Alan Lightman, talking it down.
Hello, welcome to Pod Songs, where we interview inspirational people as inspiration for a new song. Today, my guest is the musician Leo Sidran, and his guest is Alan Lightman. Hello, sir.
Hello, sir.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. Okay, well, are you ready for this?
I really don't know. You know, this one is so different for me because, and I think it's good. I mean, in all fronts, not just the musical aspect of this project, but the podcast aspect, because I'm so in control of my projects.
You do a wonderful job.
I'm aware that my MO is to kind of just make sure that my thumbprint is everywhere. And so, you know, after nearly 250 podcast episodes, I have a kind of a sense of, well, this is what I do and this is how I approach it. And, you know, I don't think I've written out questions or even bullet points for an interview in over 5 years. You know, I just go in and try to lock in with the person I'm going to talk to. But I read your little sheet that you send out about process. And I said, well, in the interest of following this thread, I wrote some questions out. I don't know if I'm going to use them, but, you know, I'm here for the experience. Am I catching you in Italy? Are you still in Italy right now?
I am still in Italy. Yeah, I've been here 10 years now, and I've got a little baby, 5-month-old now. So I'm in your phase of rediscovering life and my relationship to my father as well, and completing the cycle. Yeah,
that's right.
It's crazy. Yeah, and I'm a bit tired, but you see these bags under the eyes. Actually, coming to do a podcast is like a real break, you know, because I give a real excuse not to be holding the baby. He's going through a real fussy period at the moment.
How do you deal with that? You know, I mean, I was just walking the dog. I realized I had promised my wife that I would walk the dog before we did this. And so doing this interview.
Yeah, but you walk the dog. I have to carry him.
I know, I understand that. You're very different. My daughter's
mine's a lot harder.
It is harder. It is harder. But, you know, I mean, yours is harder. Although I remember when I started looking into Buddhist philosophy a little bit, and I learned that the fundamental principle of Buddhism is that life is suffering. And I took major issue with that because I felt
I disagree with that a lot. Yeah. But anyway,
I don't suffer. Life is not suffering, you know. But then I realized that I realized, and also through a bunch of these interviews that I've done, like I interviewed the actor Peter Coyote a couple of times. He's also a Zen Buddhist priest, and he said to me, "It's not suffering. It's been mistranslated. What it is affliction. Life is affliction. That's how it translates." And I thought, well, okay, yeah, life is affliction. I had to walk the dog and I was stressing out before and that's affliction. I mean, it seems like a ridiculously minute affliction, but it is a kind of affliction. You holding your baby incessantly is affliction, even though it's like it's like the most joyous thing you could possibly do. It's also like, oh my God, when can I put this baby down so I can like...
Yeah. I mean, we spent years trying to make the thing. Now he's here. We're arguing about who's going to hold him. So... I think he's definitely a Zen teacher. That's what I've heard it called. A baby is that you have to be in the moment and you have to keep your shit together because he will run the show.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. So, you know, here you are. You know that there's chaos on the other side of the door, and you have, you know, this conversation right now that we're having is
it's great.
But it's so much work that you've put in to make this happen, right?
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like, oh, I really need to show up? Like I really have to extra show up right now, considering how much I've worked to put this together?
No, because now you do the interview.
Oh, right. That explains why that's how I'm feeling.
Yeah. Because if we could talk about your guest for a minute, Alan Lightman is a heavyweight. I wouldn't want to do this interview. You've got to really show up. Why did you pick him first? That's probably a good question.
You know, as heavy as I knew he was, as much of a heavyweight as I knew he was, I actually did not know the half of it. When I
so you've been researching.
I mean, I read a couple of his books when I was in college. I read a book called Einstein's Dreams. That was the first thing I read.
Right, that's the most famous one, yeah.
That's the most famous one. And that is a book that Alan Lightman is a physicist and he's also a writer. He lives in between the space of science and the arts.
At Harvard, didn't he hold dual...
he did at MIT. Heads? Yeah, at MIT.
MIT, wow.
That's an unusual...
That's pretty unusual, to be the head
of these two disciplines. This book, Einstein's Dreams, first of all, I mean, I didn't remember it specifically. I remembered the feeling of it. You know, I mean, it's almost 30 years. It's crazy to even be alive long enough that I could say I read a book 30 years ago and I still remember what it felt like to read it. But really, I put Alan Lightman's name on the list. Like, I would like to talk to Alan Lightman because I remembered that feeling. And part of what I remembered about it was an understanding that we as creative people take our sources from all over. And in fact, the more I've been thinking about preparing for this interview for Pod Songs, for your project, I realized that it's kind of the ultimate conversation to have, because we're talking about somebody who studied deeply the world of physics and let it inform his poetic heart. You know what I mean? So like Einstein's Dreams is a book that imagines what were the dreams that Albert Einstein was having in the spring of 1905 when he was formulating the theory of relativity. So it's not really a science text. It's kind of like a dream state of what might have been going on in the background of a great scientific mind that would help him to formulate his theory of relativity.
Okay.
That conceit is so brilliant that I wanted to talk to Alan. I just wanted to talk to the person that wrote that.
Wow.
And I did remember that I read another one of his books after that called Dance for Two, a collection of essays that he wrote that primarily explored how science shows up in our lives in all kinds of places. Like there's one essay that I did remember reading all those years ago, and I went and reread it before this interview, about a ballet dancer and all of the forces that are taking place on the stage, in her body, in the air, how physics is contributing to movement, to dance, like what's happening, how does the body move through space? But then beyond that, I mean, Alan Lightman is highly accomplished. He's written a number of novels. He's written a memoir. He's written essays. He's written scientific books. He did scientific work. He's really kind of a Renaissance person, I think. I did see that he's just about to launch this new miniseries on PBS, television program. It seems like he really is interested in trying to answer these big spiritual questions through the lens of science. So
he's interviewing the Dalai Lama, I saw in the trailer.
I saw that too.
So I'm 4 degrees. I'm interviewing you. You interview Alan. Alan interviews the Dalai Lama. So I'm 4 degrees. Is it 3 degrees from the Dalai Lama?
You know, I'm not enlightened at all. I mean, that's a ridiculous thing to say, but I have interviewed some other people who spoke to the Dalai Lama also.
Oh yeah?
It is kind of incredible to think that we're always a few degrees away from.
Exactly.
Anyway, that being said, you know, when I married my wife, I promised her that I would introduce her to Madonna one day. She loves Madonna. And we actually got together playing in a Madonna cover band years ago. And I was absolutely confident that I could get her in a room with Madonna at some point. And I used it as a kind of I tried to attract her with it. I said, hey, you stick with me. I'll get you to meet Madonna one day. And I can't do it. I can't get it done.
But you won an Oscar. Yeah, you mean I could interview you basically for. I mean, I was checking out all so you do so many big name advertising commercials. Well, you do Coca-Cola, American Express, and FIFA. You've done so much work, and you do this podcast as well. You're as productive as Dr. Lightman.
I mean, it's just survival. You know, I realize that to make a living in the arts,
because you grew up in it, the family, you must have seen that. You know, jobbing musicians, it's tough, no?
And it's a job. I still deal with that balance between art and commerce all the time. It's a big part of what I'm talking to people about in the podcast. Sometimes I think I interview people in my podcast because I want them to tell me it's okay. You know, I want to hear them tell me how they deal with it. But it's a job, you know, and it's also an enormous privilege. I mean, sometimes I think I support myself by manipulating sound. You know, other people have proper jobs. My job is to invent things and make people hopefully feel something through what I make. It's pretty incredible. But so what that means is that over the course of a lifetime, I mean, it's a lot of projects and clients. And
I got a job out of university as a copywriter. I was working as a songwriter. So, you know, I was writing songs, and they said, "Oh, well, you write songs, you can do copy." I mean, so I moved to the Netherlands, and I got a job there, and I was 21 or something, really young, and to move to the Netherlands was fantastic, but then to work in copywriting is, you know, I learned a lot you do get a lot from it. It's a discipline about how to communicate, have a concept. And I think it's helped me with pod songs because, you know, you have to, how to frame things to communicate. And that's informed maybe in my lyric writing. These sort of lyrically informed has to be about a subject. And maybe I got that from, you know, instead of just writing love songs forever, as many of my peers seem to do.
I really made an effort at a certain point in my songwriting to stop writing love songs, or at least in the traditional sense, in the framework that I had been writing them before. They still managed to slip out.
Yeah.
But, I mean, how can you avoid it? But I think the world is filled with love songs, great love songs.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm not knocking it. But once you've done 400.
what else can we talk about?
Yeah.
And it turns out it's actually quite difficult to figure out what to talk about if you're not going to talk about love.
Right. That's why I have pod songs.
Well, I thought about that as I was approaching this also. Like, I tend to go, like I was saying, in my own interviews, I go with no agenda because I don't want to inhibit what might happen,
Right.
And so as I prepared for this interview, I went in with sort of no agenda, just like I want to speak with Dr. Lightman and allow his answers to guide the conversation. But then I wrote to you the other day and I said, well, I forgot what we're doing, actually. I forgot that this is framed around both a larger question of, well, first of all, is this in the service of a larger cause? And also, what do I need to ask about in order to write a song?
It's good just to let it flow. And, in terms of a cause, it could just be about, the human cause, about what it is to be human, or is there a God, or something big will come out of it. It could be the biggest question. So it doesn't have to be about, we don't never go into the interview with this song is about this, but just it has to be a summary of the conversation. So whatever we talk about. Through
my work as a commercial composer, I have had to write many songs to order. Exactly. And you realize that it is a craft. On the other hand, when it comes to my own songs, I often try to let the process remain a little mysterious and hope that the muse will visit you, as I think we want to believe.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I believe we're in a sea of mind. I'm actually a member of a spiritual organization called the Etheria Society, which is billed as the religion of the future. And so we believe that you evolve into greater and greater life forms on other planets and other classrooms at different frequencies of vibration. And eventually life forms merge to form planets and suns, solar systems, and you evolve into greater and greater entities.
When did you discover this organization?
It was about 3 years ago. I was in India and had a kind of an awakening. Yeah, I just started waking up every day at 3:33 and having all these synchronicities. And then I was directed to this organization via Kundalini. I was learning about yoga. So yeah, it was pretty crazy at the time. But now it's really a scientific religion. It takes a long time to talk about it, but check it out. Etherius.org is the website.
Right. I like your planet poster behind your.
Yeah, this is all from the Ethereal Society. This is the Mother Earth, a living being, Dr. King, the Logos of Earth. It's big stuff, yeah.
And were you married when you went through this transition?
Yeah, I was with my partner. We're still not married. We're still.
Were you with your partner? Yes.
Yes, we were. Yeah.
Quite a traditional way of framing that question. Were you with the same partner?
Yes. Yes. She's still with me. Yeah. She stuck through it.
What? That's what I was going to ask you. What is that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, she went through it. She thought it was pretty weird, but but I think a lot of these people who also joined the societies, you go through, because I was into Ayurveda first, and then Buddhism, and then Vipassana. So I come through. So once you do those things, people label you as a searcher, and then so when you finally find the gold, people say, well, he's just a searcher. So you're kind of labeled with that. So they think this is also a phase.
But how do you know that it's not? I mean, did you think that all of the other phases on the way to this were phases when you were in them, or did you see them as the thing?
No, I didn't really see them as the thing. That's why I kept searching. Yeah. You're such a professional here. Now you're interviewing me. You're supposed to be preparing for Dr. Lightman. You're just pulling these stories out of me with your natural charm and your tried and tested interview technique.
I have discovered through experience that I much prefer to be the one asking the questions.
Well, you can slip into your other mode. That's our guest.
Dr. Lightman.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us. So
you're in London? Where
I'm in Italy. Leo's in New York.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And where are we finding you?
I'm in the Boston area.
Great. It's really a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Jack, should I dive in? Is there anything you want me to say?
No, please. So I'll just give a little preamble. So we're going to write a song inspired by the conversation today. So if there's a particular thing you feel you'd like it to be in the song or you'd like to talk about, then just talk about it today, and we'll go in that direction.
Okay. Well, this is an unusual conversation for me. I've done many podcasts, but not one where a song is being written.
Yeah. If you could speak in rhyme, that would really help our work as well.
Right. Well, if I could sing well, that would probably help even more.
Definitely.
Couldn't hurt. I'm Leo, by the way. It's really
Leo.
a pleasure to meet you. It's interesting to hear you say that you've done many interviews, but none in which a song is being written, because I think one of the things that I was so inspired by in your work is the understanding that we can take the material for creative work from all kinds of sources. Particularly, I think about when I, as a young undergraduate, read Einstein's Dreams. It was a revelation to me because it was so emotive. And yet I understood that it was influenced by what may have been, in your mind, informing Einstein as he developed his theory of relativity.
Well, I didn't expect that plan for that book to be a science book. I used Einstein as a literary device, but I certainly did not write it as a lecture on relativity or a Physics 101 course or anything like that.
I wonder if your science background, your authenticity, you validated it because you come from the world of science, that people decided to see it through that lens.
Well, that could be. I think that my background as a scientist helped me conjure up the various ways that time might behave, but I don't know whether it had any impact on authenticating the book. I just don't know the answer to that.
I'm so curious about this life that you've lived between science and the arts.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I understand about your biography, going all the way back to your childhood in Memphis, is that your father owned a movie theater and your mother was a dancer.
That's right.
Just curious what your relationship was with the movies, the arts in general as a kid.
Neither one of my parents was an artist per se. My father was a pretty good cartoonist, but that was totally as a hobby. He drew cartoons on the wall of my pediatrician. But in terms of the movies, because my father owned some movie theaters, I saw a lot of movies. And I think I became very conscious of scene setting. And later on, I think that I incorporated that sensibility of scene setting into my writing. My mother, as you say, taught dancing. She was a good dancer. I'm a terrible dancer, so I don't know whether I got anything positive from there, but I did enjoy watching her dance. So those were influences on me. When I was in high school, I was on the editor of the literary magazine, and I wrote poetry, but I also entered projects in the local science fairs. So I had that kind of split personality from a young age.
I think over time it has proven to be your great strength, but there are so many forces in all of these disciplines that would encourage you to choose one or the other. Did you feel that stress, and how did you deal with it?
I definitely felt that pressure from family and friends and teachers. I think it's just easier in life to be more of the scientific type, quantitative, deliberate, versus the artistic type where you embrace ambiguity. I had two groups of friends when I was growing up. I had the scientific types and I had the artistic types. And I easily went back between the two groups without thinking there was anything unusual about that. But looking back on it, I see that I had two distinct groups of friends. I think that most children have an affinity and an interest in both the sciences and the arts. And I think that it's kind of drummed out of them. They pick up either consciously or unconsciously a message that it's easier to make a life if you're one or the other.
Do you still see that you have different groups of friends or different affinities like that? Or do you see it as your life is more connected now?
Well, my life is certainly more connected, but I still have two different groups of friends.
You talk about embracing the unknown, that there's something much less clear about a life in the arts. You described, I think it was in Probable Impossibilities, this moment, and maybe you've described it in other places, this moment when you were a young boy and you experienced what we would call an out-of-body experience, this like a very powerful, unknowable event.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think it's possible that many people have had experiences like that, like the one I had, and maybe not have noted it as significant. But I was probably about 9 or 10 years old, and it was actually during the daytime. There was a train that went by our house in Memphis close enough so that you could hear the train going by. And, sometimes sounds will trigger thoughts and memories and ideas, same way smells do that Proust wrote about. I think sounds do the same thing. They're sort of primal. And somehow the sound of the train going by triggered something in me that launched this out-of-body experience where I saw myself not only out of my body, but sort of from a vantage that was in outer space. And I felt that I could sort of see my life as a speck in the cosmos, a tiny both in time and in space, and sort of got this visceral sense of the vast expanse of time before I was born and in the vast expanse of time after I would be dead. And I felt very small, and I also felt like it really didn't matter to the cosmos what happened to me. And then I thought of all of these people, starting with my parents, who, for a child, those are the most important people in your life, and my brothers, and then my teachers and all the people that I knew. And I was thinking, all of these people get up in the morning and they brush their teeth and they go to dentist appointments, they go to school, and none of it matters. It's just an insignificant speck in the cosmos. Nobody's going to remember them after they're gone. In fact, the whole planet is just a speck, from a cosmic point of view. Why do we even bother to get up in the morning? It was that line of thinking, and I was only about 10 years old. I was sort of philosophically inclined from a young age.
Clearly. Do you feel that everything that followed that experience in some ways was a response to it, or were you already tuned in? I mean, it seems like so much of your work has been dealing with those questions.
I think a lot of my work has been dealing with our mortality, which, of course, is the fundamental issue in front of all of us. And there's an anthropologist, an American anthropologist named Ernest Becker, who wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning book in the 1970s called The Denial of Death. And he makes an argument in that book that everything that we do, that we human beings do, Homo sapiens do, all of our institutions, our politics, our science, our art, the national boundaries we draw, all of it, everything is a attempt to put off death. Somehow or another, it's an attempt to circumvent the inevitable end of all of us. So I've been fascinated by that idea. I've also been fascinated by the fact that we are just a collection of atoms and molecules that happens to come together in a special arrangement for a few years and then dissolves. We're just material. And somehow this indescribable, unique, fabulous experience of consciousness and everything that consciousness brings about is just a sensation brought about by the electrical and chemical exchanges between neurons in our brain. I mean, that just to me is an overwhelming idea. And then the fact that in a few short years, the special arrangement of our atoms and molecules that makes us, that makes consciousness, will dissolve. Our atoms will be scattered about in the soil and the oceans and the ground and the air. And they will have been our atoms, but our consciousness will not be there. That's just a staggering thought to me.
Has your thinking on it evolved over time?
I think it's sharpened. I've learned more about brain science, and I've talked to some leading neuroscientists. And I think I understand it better at a scientific level. I don't think I understand it anymore at a philosophical or aesthetic or theological level. So I'm just totally boggled by these ideas. Some of these ideas are themes in an upcoming public television series that's coming up in early January, and that I'm involved with.
Yeah, this is a show called Searching, right? Our Quest for Meaning in the Age of Science.
Yes.
Based on what I've seen, it looks like it took you all over the world to talk to all kinds of people about how they see this question.
Yes, that's right. These are profound questions. And of course, there are no answers to profound questions. We just mull over them and ponder them and are provoked by them. And, some of that provocation brings out science. Some of it brings out art. Some of it brings out music, I'm sure. These are eternal questions. I think in the 21st century that we can put these questions into a modern scientific context, but we still don't have answers.
Reading your work, thinking about the nature of the universe, our lives don't mean anything. You can't even see them. You can't measure it. And yet here we are. But also, thinking about like the history of humanity, and then in the last couple of 100 years, scientific development started to accelerate. You were very fixated on the year 1905 for a long time. You loved that period at the beginning of the 20th century. It was something that was like bubbling with promise, and all of this was delivered in the 20th century. But now in your own lifetime, it seems like our understanding of the universe is speeding up at an accelerated pace, at an exponential pace. I saw you say, maybe even in the preview for the miniseries, every moment matters. But my question is, but does this one matter more? I mean, is it possible to identify this moment in human history as more important?
Well, when you say this moment, you mean plus or minus 50 years or 100 years?
Well, I don't know if you're talking about in the sense of all we have is this moment in the sort of, philosophical sense of it, or if you're referring to, yes, this historical moment, we could define it a matter of decades or centuries or days.
Well, so that's two different perspectives. And so let's talk about each of them. I used to think that only things that were permanent had meaning. We're talking about meaning. And for some reason, I thought that something had to be permanent or very long lasting to have meaning. The Leonardo da Vinci's paintings on the Sistine Chapel, ceiling the Sistine Chapel, that will last a long time. Shakespeare's plays will last a long time. But even Leonardo da Vinci's paintings will eventually be gone. I mean, there may be some digitized version of them 500 years from now. But so I think that there's nothing that human beings do that's really permanent. Everything that we see in nature is impermanent. Even the stars eventually will burn out. So in the absence of anything at all that's permanent and long-lasting, where do you look for meaning? I think that the only place you can find meaning is in the moment. Mm-hmm. When you're doing something very special. I think many of us, we're on automatic pilot half the time. We're just going about our business, checking off our to-do list, not really being mindful, to use a Buddhist term, of really just being in the moment and giving yourself fully to the moment. Getting to the other perspective of whether this historical period is special in all of the, centuries of recorded history and all the accomplishments of human beings. I think that the internet and the computer and the information explosion that we have will be considered to be a very special moment in the history of humankind. So I do think that we are in a special moment for that reason.
Framing it in terms of the information explosion could be seen as very optimistic.
I'm optimistic and pessimistic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm optimistic because the internet and the computer have allowed us to do vastly more things than we were able to do in the past. So by any measure of what constitutes accomplishment, I think that we will accomplish exponentially more with this capability. What I'm pessimistic about is that it has speeded up the pace of life to an unhealthy degree. The pace of life, the speed of the pace of life has always been regulated by the speed of communication.
Mm-hmm.
And In the 1830s, it was the telegraph, that was the new communication device, which could send a few bits per second. And 1985, the internet came, it could send 1,000 bits per second. And now we can send 1 billion bits per second of information. And if you just look around you, you can see that people are living faster than they were before because of our high-speed communication devices. People look at their smartphones every 5 minutes. We divide up our day into 15-minute units of efficiency. A study was done by the British Council a few years ago of the walking speed of people in major cities. And it was found that over the last 30 years or so, the walking speed in 20 major cities has increased. We're just living faster. The downside of that is that we don't have living as fast as we do. We don't take the time to reflect on who we are and what our values are and where we're going. We're just rushing from one thing to the next. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule, but in general, this fabulous development of the computer and the internet has increased the pace of life at the cost of self-reflection, meditation, and consideration of who we are and where we're going. So that's why I say I'm both optimistic and pessimistic.
You remain very prolific, and you seem to be only leaning further into the exploration of these big and quite patient questions. How do you navigate through this accelerated pace of life?
Well, my wife and I are extremely fortunate in that we have a summer house on a small island in the state of Maine, and we spend our entire summers there. My wife is a painter, and I'm mainly a writer now. There are no boats or ferry service or bridges to the island, and we really unplug there. And I try to take some time every day, even when I'm not on this island, to unplug, to take a walk without my smartphone, which I strongly recommend to everybody, just to take 20 minutes a day, unplug, and just let your mind go where it wants to go. So that's the way that I have, up until recently, I didn't use email.
Really?
Yeah. But I teach at MIT, and it began to be a problem for my students that I was not on email. So I eventually threw in the towel and joined email.
I guess we shouldn't expect to find you on Instagram or
Twitter. No.
Twitter anytime soon.
I mean, I wasn't on Twitter even before Elon Musk bought it, and I certainly wouldn't get on it now.
It seems like you sat that one out long enough that it'll run its course.
Yeah, I think so.
And can we talk about music? I mean, I know that music also has been in your life, and that at times you have really sort of held music up as a special case in the arts. What is your relationship with music like?
Well, I took 10 years of piano lessons when I was a child, and I studied with a woman who was the grand student of Franz Liszt. So I can trace my musical heritage 3 generations back to Franz Liszt, who was a great pianist as well as composer. The piano has stayed with me. I mean, 10 years is long enough for it to get into your blood. So I've had a piano wherever I've lived, and I play something almost every day. I also played the flute when I was in graduate school. When I was a graduate student getting a PhD in theoretical physics, and I took time out to learn the flute. So music has been a part of my life. I wrote a novel called Mr. G, which is the story of creation as told by God. He's all powerful, but he makes mistakes at times. He has an uncle and an aunt who are constantly giving me advice about how to go about creation. People have told me that there's a lot of music at least in the first few chapters of that book. I wasn't aware of it at the time when I was writing it, but apparently at least some readers feel that it's there.
Do you listen to music when you're working?
I often do. Not always. I like to work in a quiet place. I know that writers have all different kinds of modus operandi. and some writers like to work in a noisy cafe. I don't know what composers of music, I don't know whether there's the same range of environments that they like, but I often listen to music. I like quiet music.
Do you select music according to how you want to feel the energy of what you're feeling?
I sometimes do. There's a magnificent piece, and I can't remember the composer now, but you'll know it. It's some like Ode to a Princess Dying Young. Do you know that one?
Don't, you could fill many books with what I don't know.
Well, same here. There are certain pieces of music that that put me in the right frame of mind for a particular part of a book that I'm writing. It's amazing what emotional impact music has.
Yeah.
Of course, you guys know more about that than I do, but
I don't know. I mean, you talk about the thing that triggered your out-of-body experience as being a sound, right? I mean, all the way back.
It was a sound. It was a sound, yeah.
Which is music, ultimately. I mean, it's the same kind of trigger.
I mean, I think that being sensitive to sounds had survival benefit, back 2 million years ago when Homo sapiens was evolving, that you had to be sensitive to sounds for survival. If there's a rustling in the bushes, you had to know whether it was friend or foe. And I think that our appreciation to music as an art form is probably a byproduct of that sensitivity to sound, which had survival benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I often ask the question, why did we, in the midst of all of the struggle of surviving, why did we start making up melodies? I mean, why would we create music? Of all the things that we could have been doing, we started singing, and they found flutes in the caves. They found these bird bone flutes. I mean, it goes all the way back. It's a really interesting impulse that came out of us.
It is. It might have been part of the same impulse that stirred Neanderthal man to do the paintings on the wall. An expression of your being in this strange cosmos of a universe that we're in, this strange place. And how do we express ourselves? And I think that painting and music are long before science.
Well, but again, I think that's why it's kind of striking that you, with all of the awareness of the universe and the realization of our space in it, at an early age decided that you would devote part of your time to poetry, which is another impulse that's related to what you're saying. It's an assertion of self. It's an expression of being. Knowing what you knew about where or feeling what you felt about our place in the universe. Why write poetry?
Well, we were talking about music. Poetry is musical. Poetry is meant to be read aloud, and it has rhythms and cadences and sounds. And so, you see, I've got 4 grandchildren, and they make up poems and sing things in rhyme just spontaneously. I think poetry, when I was young, writing poetry, expressed both my philosophical bent and my love of sound.
Has your thinking about the role of the arts, of creativity, changed as the world has become more complicated? I mean, is it more interesting for you to express yourself artistically or creatively today?
Yeah, I think so. I hope that I'm more mature than I was at 25 years old. And I'm able to see the world on a larger canvas because of that. I've had more life experience, as we all do as we get older. And I see the arts and the sciences as different ways of expressing ourselves. As we get older, we hopefully we think more about who we are.
Well, when you spoke about mortality, about how at the end of the day, maybe the fundamental issue that you've been grappling with is mortality. You seem like you're very healthy. You seem like you're strong. But as we get older, we approach our mortality more viscerally.
Yeah.
So not only are we living in a complicated world, a world of moving at a faster pace, as you say, but the question of mortality becomes more in focus.
It becomes more real. Getting back to the previous question you asked me, as I've gotten older and I've understood more about myself, I think I realize that I am an artist at a very deep level. And I don't say that to compliment myself, but I like the solitude of creating something in the arts. I mean, I know there's some arts where you're always working with other people, if you're playing in a symphony orchestra, if you're in a dance troupe. But I think many of the arts that you are working as a solitary creator. And that's something that I feel is a very deep part of me. I know if I go 2 or 3 days, even as little as 2 or 3 days without doing something creative, I feel empty. My skin starts to crawl. I really think that artistic exploration and expression are deep parts of me. I also know that I'm fundamentally a scientist. If I see a boat on the water, a motorboat, and there's a wake behind it that's at a certain angle, I immediately want to calculate why that angle is what it is. And so I have a deep part of me also that wants to understand quantitatively and rationally why the physical world is as it is.
And even maybe what makes it beautiful. When I read that your mother taught dance, I was reminded of that early essay in Dance for Two, where you describe what's happening with a ballet dancer, what forces are at work. And it was sort of like, in a way, helping to explain not only what's making this happen, but why we maybe think it's beautiful. Everything has to take place in order for us to perceive it as beautiful.
Yes. Understanding why things are beautiful in a scientific manner, for me, does not diminish my awe in the slightest bit. I'm still as awestruck by the way that a setting sun melts and the way that mist rises from the ground early in the morning, rainbows, the blue of the sky. I can explain all of those things in scientific terms, but it doesn't diminish the transcendent experience of witnessing them.
You know, songwriters often talk about how when they are really in a flow state, the act of creation is almost a sense that something is passing through you or moving through you, that you're just channeling something that was always there.
Yeah.
I wonder if you've had any experience as you pursue your own creative work.
Well, I love that description that you have, and I think that I've had that feeling also. At the same time, as a scientist, I think that ultimately it all is rooted in the neurons in our brains and in the electrical and chemical messages between them. But I have certainly had that feeling like something is being channeled through me. Were either one of you sailors? Well, I'm going to describe an experience that happens when you're sailing a boat that is exactly the way that I feel when I get into this zone that you're describing. What slows boats down, a sailboat down, is the water, of course, the friction in the water. If you have a boat with a round bottom, and some boats have round bottoms, and if you have a strong wind, every once in a while, the boat will get up on top of the water and plane over the water. It's called planing. It's skimming over the water, and the friction goes to zero. And so what it feels like if you're in the boat is it feels like this hand has grabbed hold of the mast of the boat and just yanked you forward. That's what it feels like. And when I'm doing something that's really creative, writing or even playing music on the piano, and I get into this zone, it feels like I'm planing. It feels the same.
Removal of obstruction.
Removal of obstruction, removal of friction.
When it comes to music, sometimes I've asked this question if we really are just unlocking or accessing things that exist, patterns that the brain perceives as beautiful. The Overtone series is one of them, where we start to see, well, we think that these connections, these patterns of notes and of chords and of sounds are beautiful. And it's not a mistake. I mean, it actually is something that's occurring naturally, and we're just kind of trying to borrow it in our own way.
Write it down, yeah.
And as a writer, too, I mean, you have form, you have shape, you have rhythm, you have a lot of naturally occurring phenomena that you're kind of borrowing just to put a great sentence together or a great paragraph together.
Right. But in addition to all of that, you have characters. In the novels that I've written, it's frequently the case that in the first draft of the novel, I don't understand the characters very well. And some of the things they say don't ring true to me. And then there are moments where I suddenly get an insight into a character and I understand who she is. And it may be just with a single sentence that comes out. And suddenly I understand this character. Of course, a novelist shouldn't understand his characters totally, because once you understand a character totally, there are no longer any subterranean depths of complexity. Real people are very complicated, full of self-contradictions. And so I want to understand the character, but I don't want to understand the character fully, because once I understand the character fully, the reader will no longer feel that submerged depth of complexity. You know, when you think about it, we don't really know anybody perfectly. We don't even know our boyfriend or girlfriend perfectly.
I thought you were going to say we don't even know ourselves perfectly.
Well, I don't think we know ourselves perfectly either.
And we do things that don't always make sense even to us.
We do. And that's the wonderful thing about human beings. That's why all of this is fun. If all of this were totally predictable, I think it would be much less fun. In the television series that's premiering in January, I talked to a neuroscientist, a leading neuroscientist, and I asked him the following question. Do you think that we will ever understand the brain well enough so that we could upload the brains of two people into a computer and have it predict whether they will fall in love? And he said, well, right now we can say that there's a 40% chance you'll fall in love with Alice and a 70% chance you'll fall in love with Mary. As time goes on, those percentages will get higher and higher and approach 100%. And I told him, you know, Bob, I really don't want a computer predicting who I'm going to fall in love with.
I have often wondered, what would a computer make of arranged marriages? You know, there are plenty of examples of people who fall in love over time. I mean, we're capable of falling in love with many people for multiple reasons. I don't know if a computer can really predict those kinds of things.
Well, I hope not.
That is so interesting to hear you say that as a novelist, you shouldn't fully know your characters. I mean, I guess I've heard people talk about how they get to know their characters. You're discovering your characters. They reveal themselves to you, which always seems so.
Yeah.
How could something that is
interesting? Right. How could somebody reveal it if it's all coming out of your brain?
Creation of your own.
Well, let's get back to this channeling verb that you used, that even though it's coming out of your brain, it's coming out of a subconscious part of your brain. And the subconscious brain is vastly underrated.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's a huge amount of thinking and decisions and sensibility that our conscious brain is not aware of. So I think that this feeling of channeling is an example of that.
Yeah. You described early on your comfort with place setting as being related to the movies, you know?
Right.
And I think part of your great success as a writer about science is that you're able to explain it in a way and set the place of the conversation in a way that's accessible. Do you see them as very different when you're writing about something that is naturally occurring, that you can't invent, you can only describe, that the poetry comes in the way it's described, as opposed to when you're creating something fully out of whole cloth?
There are similarities. You know, I think good science writing or good writing about any subject involves storytelling, because, you know, that's gets back to our primitive selves. But I also think there's some differences in science writing or creative writing. Let me generalize science writing to expository writing, you know, where you're nonfiction, you're making an argument and you amass facts to lead your reader from the beginning to the end of the argument. We all learn, or we should learn, my daughter's never learned this, that in good expository writing, you should start each paragraph with a topic sentence, which sort of tells the reader what the idea of the paragraph is. It's a common usage in expository writing. You're supposed to start each sentence in expository writing with a sentence that sort of summarizes the paragraph and tells your reader where they're going. In fiction writing, a topic sentence is fatal because you want your reader to be blindsided. You want them to be carried off to that magical place you're trying to create. You want them to become part of the scene. And if you tell the reader at the beginning what the trip is about, it will cancel the trip. You want your reader to participate with you in the creative activity. And every reader will bring a different set of life experiences. It's probably the same when you listen to music. Everybody who listens to music is already bringing to the table all the music they've ever heard in their life, all the musical experiences they have. They're not listening with a blank slate.
Yeah, although what's interesting is, I live primarily in the world of song and the popular song, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I have an 11-year-old daughter. Watching her wake up to music has been interesting. And I think kids can tell you, if I were running a record label and I had a new band and I wanted to know, is this song a hit? I would put a dozen 11-year-old girls in the room and they'll tell you right away, is this a hit or not? They attach themselves to what's working about it, what's catchy about it, is it too slow? They understand it intuitively, and then we spend the rest of our lives kind of complicating it with the questions of aesthetics and style, but they know right away, is this a hit?
That's interesting. That's very interesting. I don't know whether it's the same in music or in fiction, but I know that in fiction that you want to leave room for your reader's own imagination. And so you don't start each paragraph with a topic sentence.
And maybe you don't even know what your topic sentence is. It sounds like there's a lot of discovery as you write.
Yeah, right. Exactly. There's discovery, which is, partly related to not understanding your characters fully.
Do you write long outlines of your books?
I have very simple, sketchy outlines, but I always leave room for my characters to surprise me. I try not to overplot a book if it's a novel. I want to be surprised. I can put my character in a situation where they're going to have to confront something, but then I stand back and get out of the way and just listen to them talk or watch them do what they're going to do. And I like to be surprised.
It sounds like playing God, looking down on these characters.
Well, isn't it the same when you write a tune? I mean, you're creating something that wasn't there before.
Yes, in that case, yes. But and it's true, when you write a tune, you can create anybody you want and have them do anything. They can fall in love and out of love with each other. They can hurt each other. They can answer questions. They can do all kinds of things.
Well, you can also put two notes together, that haven't been put together before, or a chord.
Increasingly harder and harder to come by. The same two notes may have been put together 1,000 times, but the way I put them together, the way
you put them together,
way it feels when I put them together. That's what I have.
That's new. There are only 100 plots in all of fiction,
right,
throughout the history, but different writers are able to make those plots come alive in a different way, in a different setting, different era, different characters.
We started out talking about Einstein's dreams because that was the gateway into my understanding of you. And I realized as we were getting ready to talk today that it was published 30 years ago. It came out in 1993. So round numbers sometimes are nice ways of marking time. I don't know. You have written so much. You've done so much work. That book is probably your most successful book.
It's my most successful book, yes.
What do you think your career would have looked like without that book?
Great question. I don't know. It certainly would have slowed me down a lot, if not stopped me altogether, if I hadn't published that book. I mean, I think I still would have been a writer and tried to, explore the connection between the science and the arts. I don't know whether I would have been as successful if I hadn't had that book under my belt. So I consider that to be a stroke of good luck, wherever ideas come from. And I'm just grateful for the muses for handing me that book.
As you were formulating it, do you remember the process of putting it together?
I do. The title came to me first, which is an odd way to begin a project. I was already interested in the tension between the sciences and the humanities, and Einstein sort of represents our rational side, and our dreams represent our more intuitive side. So the title came to me first, and then I thought that was a very interesting juxtaposition of two words.
Mm-hmm.
And then I immediately scribbled down about 10 ideas for dreams that Einstein might have had. Are you familiar with the writer Italo Calvino?
Yes.
So I had read some of the magic realist writers like Italo Calvino and Borges and Marquez, and very much appreciated their magic realism.
Yes.
So that was certainly something in my artistic library, you might say. So that's how it started.
Had you written any magical realism before that?
I'd written a couple of short essays. I began writing essays about science in the early 1980s. Around the mid-'80s, I started stretching the form of the essay and trying some experimental things. And I wrote a few essays that were really more like short stories. I had done a little bit of that before Einstein's Dreams. Did
you have a sense that there was something special about that project when you were writing it? Could you have predicted maybe this is going to resonate with people?
I did not have any inkling of its success, but I know that when I was writing it, that it felt very different from anything else that I've written. I felt like I went into a dream state myself for about 3 months. And it was almost like a long hallucination or something. So that part of it felt unusual, the actual writing of the book, but I certainly had no idea that it would be a success.
Have you had that kind of experience subsequently in projects?
I've had smaller versions of it.
Did you go to Switzerland?
Well, I've been to Switzerland since the book, but while I was writing the book, did not go to Switzerland. I did not go to Bern. And the reason I didn't go to Bern, which is the city that's described most in the book, I didn't go there because I didn't want the real Bern to interfere with my imagined Bern. I thought it might stifle my imagination if I was just writing down what I actually saw. So the way that I proceeded in that book is I did not go to Bern or Switzerland while I was writing the book. I did do some research on the street names and things like that. But then when I was finished with the draft of the book, I sent it to some people who lived in Bern. Said, please correct any, geographical mistakes I've made, like from this particular street, can you see the clock tower? That kind of thing.
Well, reading it feels like the way you describe writing it. It feels like you go into a dream. Did you add the first passage where you describe Einstein? There's only very few references to Einstein. After all of the dreams were written, did you get a sense, I need to somehow place this in Einstein's life?
In the first draft of the book, I did have the opening chapter that sets the stage, but I did not have any of the interludes about the waking Einstein, where he's talking to his friend Besso and so on. Those came in the second draft when I realized that to make this a novel or to give some narrative glue to it, so it's not just a bunch of 30 random little chapters, I needed to put in a little bit of narrative about the waking Einstein between dreams. And so I went back and put in the interludes into the book. So you're right, that's how it came about.
As a physicist, it just seems like such a ballsy thing to do, to in any way purport to know what Einstein said or thought or did. The imaginary Einstein, I think as an artist, is a very free thing to do. But considering your background as a physicist, it seems like such a radical thing to do, to imagine what Einstein might have said.
Well, I considered it to be a literary work from the very beginning. I didn't try to make any of the dreams scientifically realistic. It was always an artistic work from the very beginning. So that didn't bother me. Although it did bother some reviewers. The great physicist Stephen Hawking reviewed the book for a magazine called Nature, a science magazine, and he complained that the physics wasn't right in the book and somehow missed the point that it was not a physics textbook.
Well, I was trying to remember where I read it, and I know we're going to wrap up now. I think I read it in an undergraduate survey course called Physics for Poets, which is a class that gets taught in a lot of universities. But I went to the University of Wisconsin, and my professor was this guy, Bob March, who wrote the text called Physics for Poets.
Mm-hmm.
I brought the book home to my apartment and started reading it. And the way I remember it is I said to my roommate, this is a really interesting book. This is really cool. And my friend said to me, that guy is very close friends with my father. my roommate was Alex Canizares, and his father was Claude.
Oh, yeah.
Canizares.
Yeah, Claude Canizares, yes.
So from the moment I discovered your book, I realized that you were a real person, which sometimes is helpful in understanding people's work. Oh, that's a person. That's a person who knows somebody I know.
That's a great story. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I get to tell it to you as we wrap up, because it really has been 25 plus years that I've wanted to talk to you about it. And I'm so grateful that we got some time with you today. And I have to get to work and figure out what the muses have to offer after this.
Well, I appreciate your being interested in talking to me, and your podcast sounds very interesting, very unique. I'm pleased and honored to be a part of it.
Alan, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Leo. Thank you, Jack.
Bye-bye.
Jack, should I stay on?
Yes, you should decompress, no?
I think so, right?
Wow, what a great episode.
What a generosity. Didn't he seem to really get excited when we started to talk about the creative stuff?
He did. He kind of leaned forward in his chair, and when he started talking about the life of the characters, you really got him in then.
Thank you for making it.
So who do you want to do next?
Oh, man. First, I have to write this song. I mean, talk about trying to figure out how to write a song out of that. There's an album's worth of material in it.
I know. I was going to say, because I was thinking he said the meaning in the moment. That could be quite a nice song title.
Yes.
And then you could tie in about, watching the setting sun or the mist rising, and you could get in there about complicated characters and how we do. He talked a lot about how we need to be, reflect on our values and take the time, and he must see his, this acceleration with his students using the devices probably during class, and the attention span going down, and his work, as a writer and as a teacher, it's all about good attention span. It's about good concentration, and to see that kind of dissolving, and as we all accelerate towards infinity, as he put it. Then
it's accelerate towards infinity. Did he say that?
No, but he said something similar like that.
Brilliant thing to say. But I think what's funny about these kinds of conversations is that so much of what's revealed is like in the humanness of it, like that he refused email for so long.
Yeah.
Well,
I knew he wasn't on Twitter or Instagram or any of the socials because they researched him, but I didn't know he didn't. Because luckily he does email, because that's how I got him. I
mean, otherwise you would have been leaving messages on some sort of like an old answering machine in my feed. We just lounge,
Yes, sending pigeons to an island. I don't know what.
Island off the coast of Maine, exactly.
He's a serious guy, but he's a deep, still waters run deep now.
Because I do this also, including reaching out to people.
Yeah.
I suggested that you get in touch with him because
it's hard work.
It is hard work, but then what I realized when we started is, okay, so there's a lot, this is a little bit of the confusing thing about your project is, okay, well, who's Jack? And then who's the other? Where are they? And whose podcast is it? And what is it going to be? I mean, there's a lot of questions that are
there is. And also the musicians, when I ask them, they don't. So I'm writing a song with the guest, and then I don't understand that. Nobody understands the idea of this podcast.
Yeah.
Which is, yes, I guess if you want to do a new thing, it's difficult to explain to people, but
it just reveals itself. I mean, I think it's revealing itself.
So what are you going to say to people when you go out tonight or today? I spoke to Alan Lightman. I've got to write a song about him. I mean, this sounds simple. Yeah.
Yeah. I spoke to Alan Lightman. I mean, the other thing is that like interviews are a wonderful source of inspiration. I interviewed this other novelist years ago, Peter Straub, who was a wonderful writer and was a friend also. And he had this line where he said, inspiration is real, but earned. Which means you will get struck by inspiration, but you have to be ready for it. You have to be in mode of creating, but you can't predict when it's going to come and what's going to happen.
Yeah, well, it's like you said about this, or he said about the musician. You're every song you've ever listened to. When you meet someone, you're at their every experience.
That's a great idea for a song.
This could be an album.
I'm telling you.
Yeah, or an EP.
So what do we do now? Now we're supposed to go off into our corners and ideate, right? Make up some just initial sketches.
Yeah, we sit in front of an 11-year-old girl, and we just give her the, see she says yes or no.
She mostly says no to me. She's a tough, but she's very, very tuned into what's, I guess I would say what's commercial.
Yeah.
Do you listen back to the conversations before you write, or you just based on your sense?
No, I make lots of notes.
Yeah, I saw.
So I know. I write down the sort of the 4-word phrases that sound nice, and then rip them off for the song.
Yeah.
Well, so I'll come up with something. I'll send you an idea of what some 3 chords and a couple of rhymes, and then you you develop that into a Leo masterpiece.
I'll do what I can. Jack, I'm curious to see where this goes.
Me too.
Thanks, man.
All right. A real pleasure.
Be well.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Every single thing is impermanent. Every last star in the firmament. Everyone you love or you ever met. Every single thought running through your head. Every setting sun, every morning mist. All the works of art and the sciences. Every out-of-body experience. Every single